Dr. Hensley slid the printout across the exam table, the fluorescent lights catching on the red block letters as if they were glowing. Bob Carter, weight 603 pounds, he said quietly. You have 45 days left to reach safe numbers before December 18th. Emily stood beside her father, breath catching in her throat. The paper felt heavier than it should when she lifted it. 45. Days critical, compliance screamed back at her in bold red ink, vibrating against the clinic's steady heater hum. Bob's gaze drifted to the firefighter patch on his old denim jacket hanging by the door. For a moment, something flickered, memory pride loss. Then he turned away. I've been big my whole life, Doc, he muttered, trying for a laugh that never came. Outside, the November air knifed through their coats as they crossed the parking lot. Wind rattled a loose clinic sign, and Bob leaned against the car door to steady himself. Emily pretended not to notice the way he struggled with the buckle, or how his breath fogged the window in uneven bursts. The kitchen welcomed them with warm yellow light and the faint smell of last night's pot roast. Emily smoothed the printout on the counter, pressing each crease flat with trembling fingers, then pinned it to the refrigerator door beside the Thanksgiving calendar. Doesn't have to be right there, Bob said, reaching past it for the handle. The magnet clicked, and the paper wobbled. That's the point, she answered. He opened the fridge anyway, eyes softening when he spotted leftover macaroni and cheese. I'll walk more, he said, lifting the container. Cut back on soda. I've survived worse. It's probably just water weight. Emily didn't respond. The refrigerator light flickered across his face, the same face she remembered, grinning beneath a firefighter helmet in old photos now shadowed and tired. Later, the front porch groaned under his steps as he eased himself into the living room chair. He turned the TV on, the volume rising with every channel change until it filled every corner of the small house. Commercial jingles washed over them, bright and careless. Across the street, Mrs. Hillard tugged her trash bin to the curb. When she glanced toward their window, her breath curled in the cold like a small warning. If he wanted to live, she whispered to no one, he'd just stop eating like that. The words slipped through the thin glass. Emily froze in the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe, the printout still echoing in her mind. What if this time? She murmured, voice barely above the hum of the TV. They're right. Day 38 was circled in red on the refrigerator calendar, the ink sharp and urgent under the kitchen light. Bob pushed the bowl of steamed vegetables away with the back of his hand. Hurts too much, he muttered, abandoning the breathing exercise Nurse Janelle had shown him. Just give me real food, Em. Emily steadied herself on the counter, her fingers brushing the faded firefighter patch draped over a chair. She wondered who her father had been before the weight stole parts of him she couldn't name. The healthy bowl wilted in front of him, untouched, while he reached for the mashed potatoes cooling on the stove. It's one bowl, he said, leaning heavily against the table. One bowl won't kill me. She swallowed hard, the refrigerator hum filling the space between them. Later that morning, Emily stopped at Main Street Diner after dropping off a prescription refill. The smell of bacon and the sharp hiss from the griddle clung to the air. She slid into a booth across from Eli, the server who'd known them for years, and tried to ground herself in the simple rhythm of clattering cups and refills. Pastor Joe stepped in from the cold and spotted her. He joined her without asking, setting his gloves on the table. You're not his jailer, Em, he said gently. You're his daughter. At the booth behind them, a man whispered to his companion, not quietly enough. Guy's not trying hard enough. Some people just don't want to be helped. Emily stiffened. Eli pretended not to hear, but his eyes softened when he set a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat steady her breathing. By evening, the porch boards creaked beneath Bob's weight as he tried to rise from the chair. The porch light flickered against his pale face. Give me a second, he said, bracing himself on the armrest. His breath came short, catching in his throat. Maybe, maybe it's my time, Em. Her heart clenched at the resignation in his voice. She reached for him, but he waved her off, sinking back with a faint groan. Inside the house, Emily closed the door softly behind them and leaned against the refrigerator. Day 38 stared back at her, the red circle feeling tighter, smaller, more suffocating than before. She pressed her palms to the cool surface, eyes burning. I'm not losing him, she whispered into the dim kitchen. Not like this. Day 30 was marked in Emily's planner, a quiet reminder sitting between errands and work notes. That morning, when she walked into the kitchen, she found Bob standing in front of the refrigerator longer than usual. His hand rested on the handle, his eyes fixed on the printout taped to the door. For a moment, he looked as though he was weighing something deeper than hunger. At the diner later, Pastor Joe slid into the booth across from Emily, brushing off the cold. The breakfast rush echoed around them, forks, clicking orders called over the sizzle of the griddle. Joe warmed his hands around a mug. You know, he began, your dad once pulled a child out of a burning storage shed behind Miller's Hardware. Smoke everywhere. Folks thought the boy didn't stand a chance. Emily blinked, her throat tightening at the image. She'd heard bits of her father's firefighter days, but never this story. Why didn't he ever tell me, she murmured. He never bragged, Joe said softly. He just did what needed doing. That afternoon, Emily logged into the neighborhood Facebook group to check updates on meal trains and community events. A notification blinked, new comment on your post. She opened it and froze. Taxpayers shouldn't pay for someone who did this to himself. The words hit her like a shove. She stared at the screen, breath locked in her chest. Outside the window, a lone car passed, the crunch of gravel painfully ordinary against the sting of the comment. She closed the laptop slowly, hands trembling. When Bob shuffled into the kitchen that evening, Emily was waiting at the table. A notepad lay open, her handwriting firm and deliberate. Dad, she said, voice steady, despite the tightness in her chest. We need to set terms. He lowered himself into the chair. Wary, 45 days total, she began. You must lose at least 25 pounds. Your blood pressure and glucose need to show real improvement. Deadline is December 18th. She hesitated, then added quietly. And if you quit, I won't beg the clinic for extensions again. The room went still. Even the refrigerator seemed to soften its hum. Bob looked at her, searching her face for something: fear, hope, anger. Instead, he found resolve he wasn't used to seeing in her. After a long moment, he nodded once. Emily reached up and marked a thick red line through day 29 on the calendar. Her hand shook, but she drew it anyway. Tomorrow, she said, breath shallow, but determined, we start for real. Day 44 brought a thin winter sun, pale but gentle, across the front porch. Bob braced himself against the doorframe, took one breath, then another. Emily hovered behind him, ready to steady his elbow, but he lifted a hand to stop her. Let me try, he said. His foot touched the first board, then the next. Eli, sweeping salt from his own steps across the street, pulled out his phone when he realized what he was seeing. By the time Bob reached the porch rail, 32 slow, deliberate steps, Eli whispered, That's something, Mr. Carter, and kept filming. The firefighter patch slipped from Bob's jacket as they stepped back inside. Emily bent to pick it up, thumb brushing the frayed edge. This used to mean everything to you, she said softly. Bob looked away, a shadow passing across his features. The next morning, the clinic's waiting room smelled faintly of sanitizer and cinnamon lotion from the front desk. Dr. Hensley tapped a pen against the chart. It's day 45, he said as Bob stepped onto the scale. The numbers blinked, then settled. 18 pounds down, not 25. Silence closed around them. Bob's shoulders fell. Emily gripped her coat so tightly the zipper left an imprint on her palm. I tried, Bob whispered. I really tried. Hensley hesitated, lips pressed, thin eyes shifting between the numbers and the man in front of him. "Let's finish the pre-check," he said finally. That evening, the church lights glowed warm against the early dusk. Pastor Joe was setting up for choir rehearsal when Emily slipped inside. He paused when he saw her expression. "You look like you're carrying the whole world," he murmured. She tried to smile, but her eyes filled. Joe guided her to a pew. "Your dad didn't just save that child years ago," he said gently. "He stayed with the family at the hospital all night. He never talked about it, Emily, but I saw him. He gave everything he had long before life got hard." Her breath broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth. The next afternoon, they returned to the clinic for the final decision. Dr. Hensley reviewed the vital signs one more time. Blood pressure, he murmured, significantly improved. Glucose better than last month. Compliance, spotless. He lowered the chart, looking directly at Bob. "Your numbers aren't perfect," he said, "but your heart is responding. Let's move forward." He signed the approval. Approved for surgery. Bob covered his face with one hand as tears slipped through his fingers. "So I still get a chance." A cold wind swept across the parking lot as they stepped outside, rattling the small wind chime hanging by the clinic door. Emily squeezed his arm, eyes bright. "Let's make Christmas yours." A month after the procedure, Maple Ridge lay quiet beneath a thin blanket of snow. The porch light glowed softly against the winter dusk as Bob eased himself onto the front porch chair. For the first time in years, when he rose, he did it without gripping the armrest. Slow, steady, but all on his own. Beside him on the small table rested a folded album. The firefighter patch lay on its cover edges, worn from decades of handling. Tucked in the first sleeve was the creased paper Emily had saved, 45 days now softened and pale, no longer a warning, but a memory. Emily stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs, steam curling upward before disappearing into the cold. Bob traced the outline of the patch with one finger. "Funny," he said, voice low, "that paper used to scare me more than any fire I ever walked into." She handed him a mug. "That paper didn't decide everything," she said gently. "You did." The snow on the front walk crunched as Eli bounded up the steps, scarf flapping behind him. "Grandpa," he called, breath puffing in white clouds, "will you be at my next season? Coach says sign up, start early." Bob looked at him, really looked, taking in the bright eyes, the bundled coat, the way the boy's hope seemed to warm the air. "I'm planning on it, kiddo," he said, smiling. "I want front row seats." Eli grinned wide before darting to the railing, waving toward the street. Pastor Joe stood by the church gate, giving Bob a small nod, the kind that said everything without a word. The wind carried the distant ring of the church bell as dusk settled deeper. Emily leaned on the porch post, watching her father sip his coffee, his breaths steadier now. "Redemption isn't about numbers," she murmured. "It's about presence." A faint challenge hung in her tone, gentle but enough to make Bob huff a quiet laugh. He set the mug down and pushed himself to his feet. A soft crunch of snow marked each step as he moved to the porch railing. "Day 46, he said, glancing at the sky as if checking in with something larger than himself. "That's a good day to keep going." Emily's eyes brightened. Eli darted inside, returning with a fresh sheet of paper and a marker. He wrote Day 46 in bold strokes and taped it beside the door frame. The porch light warmed the snow with its amber glow. Coffee steam drifted upward. The firefighter patch rested against the open album. And far off, the church bell chimed again, quiet, steady, promising the start of something new. The porch light glowed softly against the winter dusk, and the old firefighter patch lay settled beside Bob's warm cup, no longer a relic of pain, but a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. His breath moved easier now, rising in gentle clouds as Emily watched him trace the folded 45-day paper tucked in the album, its warning edges softened by time. Some recoveries don't arrive in triumph. They arrive in presence, in choosing one step past the fear that once defined you. And how do we know when a second chance has truly begun? If this journey echoed something in your life, share it below. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to stay a while.